Morabart wasn't just a contract dealer, a sales pony, and something of a swindler. She was also the head barmaid of the local Morabart's tavern, although it was by popular consensus that if she kept conducting business the way she did, she was likely to lose it soon enough. The bar she ran was walled with girders and filled with tin sheets that sectioned off areas. The bar itself was quite nice. There was alcohol aplenty, the ponies could relax in beds upstairs for a price each night. How she'd gotten it set up, I wasn't quite sure. It was comfortable to sit at, it got polished a few times a week, and the place never attracted that bad of a crowd. The problem was the prices. Morab overcharged. I slipped into the Morabart's tavern and looked around. My nose wrinkled with the piss-weak smell of shitty beer. No pony really liked it in here, but it was the only place in town to get a drink, and here in the wasteland, a drink was always needed. I slipped onto a stool by the bar where I was flanked on either side by 2 stallions wearing combat armor and carrying shotguns. "Barrel, Pegleg," I said in greeting to both of the stallions. They turned to me as I flashed a grin before moving my attention to Morab, who was speaking to a mare at the end of the bar. "Hey, how about some drinks over here?" "Tom," Barrel's guttural voice greeted in return. Pegleg, however, just grunted in acknowledgement. Barrel was a large brown stallion with a jet black mane. He smelled of gunpowder, and his temper could be just as explosive. Pegleg was much like his name might suggest. Small, thin, and wiry, a grey coat with a dark grey mane, and 2 back hooves that were just stumps of wood he used for prosthetics. "What'll it be?" the barmaid asked with a narrowed gaze. I wasn't that regular of a customer. Alcohol wasn't my vice of choice, and she knew it. So any reason I could have to be in her bar wasn't a reason she would likely welcome. "I'd like to buy an extra round for these 2 fine stallions." "I don't swing that way," Barrel grunted, taking a swig of his drink, a drink that was almost empty. I shook my head dramatically. "What? No, I'm not propositioning you. I'm helping you celebrate. It's a good luck drink. I saw your names on the board out there. You're going up to the stable for the steamboat job?" He eyed me for a moment before nodding. "Well, that place is a death trap, so I figured you 2 deserved a drink as a send-off," I explained as I paid Morab for the overpriced piss water, plus a small tip. She took the caps before preparing the drinks. That mare never said no to caps. I'd made sure to get a drink for myself and reached over for it. My hoof moved too quickly, and I didn't grasp the beer in time before the mug splashed its contents all over, soaking Barrel's outfit in the process. "Oh, fuck you!" he yelled, standing up, his front drenched. "Oh, I am so sorry. I'm a bit of a klutz today," I said with a dramatic sigh. "Might be a concussion from my recent job. Took a few knocks to the head, you know. Go get yourself dried up in the toilet. I'll mind your drink." He grunted at me before shuffling away with a myriad of grumbles. I pulled his drink close with my prosthetic hoof, opened a small catch on the side, and sprinkled a small white powder into the drink. "What are you doing?" Pegleg asked. I moved the drink closer. "Just keeping his drink safe," I smiled. "Enjoying yours?" I asked, my left hoof moving from the drinks to his shoulder as I patted it neighborly. He glanced at my hoof for a moment before looking back at me. His mouth opened as though to speak before he let out a small yelp. I slipped the empty syringe out of his neck and laid it down on the table. Pegleg stared at the syringe before his eyes rolled back, and he fell off his stool with a thump. Every pony turned to look, glancing from the now unconscious Pegleg to myself. "What the fuck you do?" Barrel demanded as he returned. "Don't worry, he'll only be up for 12 hours, I think," I said. Barrel yanked me from the stool and pushed me down onto the bar. "Hey, careful of your own drink, you know I paid for that, remember?" I grunted as Bar dug into my side. He glared at me before grabbing the beer and downed it before slamming the mug back down onto the bar. "Happy? Now I'll cream ya." I raised my brow as he raised his hoof. Then his eyes rolled back and he fell over. Morab's vice was money. Barrel's was alcohol. I pulled myself up, straightened my jacket, and then turned to Morab, who was looking over the 2 sleeping beauties. She rolled her eyes before resuming her work. "What did you stick them with?" She probably didn't like that I drugged 2 of her customers, but she wouldn't do anything. I'd given her a tip, after all. "Not a clue," I admitted. "Found it on the floor of a pharmacy. But I don't think they're going to be getting up anytime soon." I sat back down on the bar stool and rubbed my neck to ease the aches and pains that had grown there. I turned back to Morab. "So how early does that job start tomorrow? Because I think you have 2 spaces free, and I'd like to sign up." Never before had I seen a more wretched hive of scum and villainy, except perhaps on some rambunctious nights at Morabart's. Altogether there were 30 of us, 30 destitute ponies, all armed and hearing the distant jingle of bottle caps in our ears. We were outside in the main market area. The stalls had closed the night before. I and Stranger sat near the back, trying to listen to Morabat, who stood at the front of the crowd as she gave the details of the contract. It was difficult to hear, mainly because some of the other ponies were chatting to each other and wouldn't shut the hell up. Bang! A shot rang out and echoed across the now silent crowd. The shot had come from one of the 4 ponies at the front that stood beside Morabat's. These were not part of the 30 that had gathered here today. They were ponies of a different sort, straight from Steambolt himself. Sleek black armor glinted in the early light, covering every inch of their bodies. It was curved and rounded like an insect. The ponies that wore them were earth ponies, or at least I guessed because of the lack of wings or horns on the armor. Their faces were masked by sleek helmets. For all I knew, they could be robots. The side of each of their armors harbored a different array of weaponry, but the one that had fired the shot had large cannons sprouting from a battle saddle unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Despite standing still, the pony had angled the barrel up into the air. The cannons, with an audible whir, soon slipped down and faced forward again.
"Thank you,"
Morab said, looking visibly disgruntled.
"These fine bucks,"
"Stallion," I muttered,
"have come straight from Steam City to supervise this operation. With your participation in this endeavor come a few vital rules,"
she said, looking out over the crowd.
"Once you walk out of that gate and start for Stable 2B, you are not allowed to forfeit or abandon this mission. Any pony that abandons their post will be killed."
The silence was palpable.
As noted on the contract, the chances of this stable being occupied are small. However, if it is, please avoid killing them, as capturing them as new slaves for Steambolt is worth 400 caps per head. If you aren't comfortable with slaving, now is your time to leave. If you don't mind it, but would rather not do it yourself, then ignore the residents as best you can and let some pony that is okay with slaving make their living. You may kill to defend yourselves, of course, but only if you absolutely need to. This is a stable, guys. They're pussies, so avoid the trigger. Okay, as a final note, residents are a secondary priority. Primary is tech, so keep it all intact. Don't blow anything up, and gather as much of it as you can. Those that want to leave, do so now. Those that are staying, good luck.
The crowd stayed silent and no one made a move to leave. 30 ponies came, 30 ponies stayed. 30 ponies didn't have a problem with slaving. I could feel Stranger eyeing the back of my head, and was grateful when the crowd started moving out. The journey from New Appaloosa to Niagara Falls was a long one, at least several hours if we walked without stopping, maybe 2 days if we took a break. Either way, it was going to be a long walk. A few ponies talked about what they might do with the fortune of caps waiting for them. I myself preferred to walk in silence rather than striking up conversation with any pony else. Silence was too much to ask for, it seemed.
"Hey!"
A voice greeted me from my right. We'd been walking for about 3 hours now in relative peace. Once or twice a few gunshots had rung out from near the front, likely a radroach or some unlucky scavenger crossing our paths. I never saw if it was either. The dangers had never gotten close enough to be a threat to the back of the line. I turned to the pony and gave him an inquisitive look. "Yes?"
"I'm Copper,"
he greeted happily. I looked him up and down. He was young, only a teenager. He had a black mane with an orange streak and a sallow yellow coat. His eyes were a brilliant blue. Overall, he was a cute lad. "Aren't you a little young for this?" I asked.
"Hey, I'm 25.
He said, flicking his mane out of his eyes. "No, you're not," I sighed. "Your dad know you're out here with us."
"I told you, I'm 25. Look, I thought you were cool, that's why I said hello, but if you aren't gonna be cool, then fuck you."
"Your dad's a pretty good drinker, you know." The buck stumbled and turned to me with his mouth agape. "You have his eyes."
How did you... Okay, you're right. Please don't tell my dad."
He hissed at me. I shrugged. "I don't know your dad." He stared at me for a moment.
"But you said..."
"I shape his hereditary from paternal lineage. It wasn't hard to figure out you'd have your father's eyes, most likely. Morabat is the only piece of entertainment in town, so your father probably frequents it. Especially if he's got a son like you with an obvious rebellious streak stressing him out. Any pony would need a drink after that." He stared at me silently.
"You're an ass."
"And you're still too young to be here."
"Well, I can't leave now, can I? If I do, I'll be killed by those 4 big guys. So I'm stuck. Besides, when all this is over, I'll be rich, and then I can live on my own."
The colt was eager. I'd give him that. I moved away, hoping he'd take the hint so I could ignore him.
"So,
But he couldn't take a hint, of course.
what happened to your leg?"
I felt a ghost of pain slice up my disembodied hoof. It was accompanied by a roiling in my stomach. "Nothing that concerns you!" I snapped at him through gritted teeth.
"Sorry,"
he gasped before he turned away. "He's just a Colt, damn it." I unclenched my jaw and breathed out heavily. "What's your name, Colt?" I asked. I could feel a stranger watching me again, him with those fucking judgmental eyes.
"I'm not a Colt."
"What's your name?" I insisted. "Just a Colt, just a damn irksome Colt."
"I told you before, it's Copper Twang,"
he said as he puffed out his chest.
"and one day it'll be a name everyone knows. I'm gonna get some money, retire to 10 pony, and get some ponies to train me to be a real good fighter, and then be a ranger for them, raiding the ruins for food and chems and stuff, and then I'll make a name for myself. I'll be the Copper Ranger, the best in the land."
I could taste this Colt's confidence, and it was pretty sour. "Where you grow up?" I asked, adding the word Colt onto the end of the sentence in my head.
"All over the place."
He shrugged.
"My dad used to be a trader before he settled down. I learned how to shoot when I was young, so I know how to defend myself."
"You ever killed a pony?" I asked. He balked at that, then shook his head. "You don't know shit." The Colt drooped as I said that. "But you will by the time this is over."
"I will,"
he said as he cocked his head.
"but we're not supposed to kill residents, and there might not even be any pony in there."
"You're right. But if residents aren't in there, that means it was never sealed. Stables were only sealed once they were full, so this will be wide open if there are no residents. That means it'll be the home of something else. Something nasty. But if it was filled, they could all be dead, and what killed them might be waiting for us, whether by some terrible experiment, a break-in, etc., in which case we're back to something nasty waiting for us." I shrugged, giving him a glance. The Colt's pupils were pinpoints, and he seemed fixed on me. "But hey, let's say, for an argument's sake, that there are ponies in there just waiting for collars around their necks. The average stable houses upwards of 500 residents. There are 30 of us. We're far more heavily armed and experienced, so yeah, we'll win. But they will have weapons too. Maybe not many, but they will have some. That means they'll be fighting back." I turned to him, looking down at his holstered pistol. "What you got there?"
9mm?
I could only sigh. I reached into my coat and pulled out my spare. "This is 10mm, automatic. Point, pull the trigger, and try not to hit me."
"Thanks. What are you gonna use?"
he asked as he looked the pistol over. I turned to stranger, meeting his eye. "I don't need to worry. I've got him." Niagara Falls had once been a beautiful and serene place. The towering waterfalls that tumbled into the ever after churned frothy water into the glistening sunlight, or at least they once had. In an effort to gain electric power to the local bases in the area, Niagara Falls had been the site of the first pony-built dam. The water became controlled, and the falls changed from a site of beauty to one of industrialism. The dam was 700 feet high, built out of concrete and filled with generators, pre-war tech, and enough hollow space inside for hundreds and thousands of ponies to be hidden away. The dam's rooms were said to travel below the water and well into the bedrock below, with rooms and chambers and more resources than any pony could grasp for themselves. Sounds like the perfect place to scavenge or even take shelter in, doesn't it? Many once thought so. Many of the inner chambers had flooded over time with the water from the gorge, and those weren't waters you wanted to go swimming in to get around. But I suppose the most interesting part of Niagara Falls was the Niagara Falls Oasis. There, sat in the middle of the gorge lake, behind the dam that lapped at the edges of the stony structure, was a small little island. It was so small that it was barely a few meters across, and contained a single tree. But it got stranger. This was perhaps one of the few places I had ever seen grass growing. Not just growing, but green. It was green and lush, and the tree flowered and gave fruit, and the water was a clear blue and sparkled gorgeously. Everything looked so inviting. This was exactly why no pony came to Niagara Falls. No pony wanted to die. We didn't know why or what was happening in this area, but the water and that little island appeared to be so magically irradiated that it caused some peculiarities. The water had a higher radiation average than any other water source in the entire of the wasteland. The island's green grass was so irradiated that eating it guaranteed cancer and death. And may Celestia have mercy on any pony that ate the fruits of that tree. Niagara Falls was a death trap. "So, I began, turning to one of the large black armoured ponies, hoping to answer the question on every pony's mind: how do we get in? He, she, it didn't look at me, but they at least did grace me with an answer.
Over the last 8 to 10 years, the radiation in this area has been waning significantly. It is now safe to enter so long as Radaway and Radix precautions are taken.
His voice was gruff and deep and muffled by the helmet he wore, but at least I knew his gender now. Radiation doesn't just go, I said, thinking out loud more than making an attempt at conversation. If 200 years haven't been enough time for the wasteland, 10 won't be enough for this place. Which means there's something here cleaning the radiation out of the surrounding environment. Which I'm assuming is what Steambolt wants, I concluded, watching the stallion's reactions. This time, he did turn to me, and even though I couldn't see his expression or his eyes, I got the distinct feeling he was displeased.
Who are you?
He asked.
You seem educated.
I fixed him with a steady stare. I'm just a smart pony. There was a standoff between us. An unspoken animosity that said this stallion really didn't like me, and I wasn't sure I much liked him either. Eventually, he seemed to understand that I was the stubborn sort, so he looked away and trotted towards the dam.
Follow me,
he called out to everyone. The other 3 insect-armored ponies flanked him as the 30-strong group slowly moved towards the water's edge. We were led down the bank and round to one of the access doors in the dam. The door was metal and firmly placed in the concrete of the massive structure. After every pony had taken a dose of Rad-X and made sure they had spare satchels of Radaway handy, the door was yanked open. The view that greeted us wasn't comforting. The door led into a small, narrow corridor which meant ponies would be walking in 2 files at most. This made for easy pickings. We'd be bottlenecked if it came to any kind of fight, but no pony other than me seemed to be paying attention to this fact. 2 of the big black armoured ponies entered, while the other 2 herded us in. Stranger and I were near the front of the crowd. I'd made a point of slipping forward to put as much distance between myself and Copper Twang as much as I could. The colt was bugging me. The corridors were surprising. Not only were they thinner than foretold, making it a tight fit for all of us, but they were well lit. The lights buzzed while filling the corridor with an artificial glow. How this place was still working after 200 years I couldn't fathom. It was probably Earth Pony ingenuity. I couldn't imagine any unicorn spells lasting this long. That wasn't to claim the superiority of Earth ponies, more to simply point out the different strengths in terms of creativity. The 2 black ponies in front led us down the corridors, pausing only at intersections. We moved to the end of this one and turned left. Another corridor dipped down into radioactive water. The black-armored freaks trotted forward, wading right into it, and we followed them. The water was up to our necks, and it was difficult to see ahead of us. Floating around in the water was a myriad of pre-war items, some wonder glue, tape, what looked to be an old radio, and even some clothing. Maybe some ponies had once used this place to hold up. Maybe it had had its staff at some point that lived in the dam and kept its generators running. The corridors eventually leveled out and the water level dropped. We now trotted our way through puddles of water that splashed around our hooves. The corridor we were in had several other turns, and a few of them seemed to have rooms. I looked around us as we walked by stacks and shelves of things and pre-war tech that seemed untouched. "Come on," I whispered to Stranger and quickly extricated myself from the crowd and down a different corridor. He trotted after me without a word, even though leaving the group probably warranted our deaths. I slipped out of sight with Stranger into a nearby room. The door had been wedged open at some point. It was dented in as though some pony had tried to force their way through. Curious, considering the rest of the place seemed pristine. The room was a medium-sized office. There were filing cabinets along one wall and a desk with a terminal sat in the corner. I padded over to it, the radioactive water sloshing around me. I hoped this water damage hadn't messed up the computer systems, though considering the rest of the place's electronics hadn't been compromised was probably a good sign. The terminal lit up with a soft green glow as I flipped the power switch, and of course, it had a password. I opened the computer's terminal before typing in a few short commands. A new window opened up, displaying a seemingly random array of characters and words. It was a wonder stable tech computers used to be so popular, considering they had such a huge vulnerability in its operating system. Somewhere in the mess of characters and words was the root password for the system. It took me a few tries, and once I had to back out to avoid being locked out of the terminal, but I finally found the password. Dawn, and the screen opened only 2 options: personnel and governmental. I selected the personnel first and was greeted by more options replacing the previous ones. I selected the first one entitled Messages out of curiosity. The list that greeted me was surprising. This terminal alone had received over 70 messages. I selected the latest one. Re. Protocol demands we begin immediately. Dear Lucretia Song, this conversation has become tiresome. The projects are being sealed away at my request, and the Stage 3 products will arrive this evening for storage. Please take care, as these will include the GE11-2 as well as the NMA-01. It is highly important that you do the job I asked of you. My predictions show that we are entering the final stages of the war, and if this tech is not accounted for in the safety of Stable 2B, then the future of Equestria may be in danger, and that danger will rest on your hesitation. Please do this. I need to make sure there is a way to save Equestria if all else fails. Twilight Sparkle, MAS, Ministry Mayor. I sucked in a breath. A message from Twilight Sparkle? Well, that was a find. But the conversation made no sense. I began perusing some of the older messages, but they seemed to revolve around this Lucretia Song character, arguing with the Ministry Mayor about whether or not it would be wise to seal the tech away so soon when they could still be of use. Twilight seemed to be more focused on saving the tech rather than using it. It made me wonder if she'd known the bombs would really fall. I backed out of the emails and moved down to the next selection. Stable Inventory. The screen suddenly flashed for a moment, and the green glow was replaced with a cool blue one that I'd never seen on a terminal before. On the screen was another request for a password, with a pixelated Equestria flag waving above it. Okay. I used the shortcut that would usually open the terminal prompt, but the moment I pressed it, the screen turned itself off. I glanced over at Stranger, who was watching me looking quite unimpressed. Hey, I didn't break it. A beep caught my attention. Error. Hacking attempt registered. Oh? 9. Why was the number 9 taking up the screen? 8. 7. Why is it counting down? 6. 5. This was probably not a good thing. 4. 3. I turned and dived out of the way to the end of the room. 2. We grabbed the filing cabinets, yanked them down with a crash. We then jumped on top of them to get above the water. Boom. The computer screen exploded in a shower of sparks. Several of its wires split open from the surge, and the water that had been sloshing around at our hooves lit up for a moment as arcane electricity surged through it. I tapped the water to make sure it was no longer shocked, before stepping down and approaching the smoking terminal. I felt Stranger's eyes on my back. Okay, so not one of my finest moments, I said, attempting to save face. Stranger didn't seem to buy it. Hey, we found out some things. The Ministry of Arcane Sciences, or at least the Ministry Mayor herself, was using Stable 2B as a storage site. That's interesting. Stranger didn't seem to agree. The sound of gunfire in the distance told me that the group had finally made it to the stable, and like predicted, some of them just couldn't help but be trigger-happy. I sighed as I sat down on the overturned filing cabinets. Might as well twiddle our hooves for a bit, I said as I pulled out some Radaway and gulped it down. I had no idea how much radiation I'd soaked up through the water at my hooves, but it probably wasn't healthy. Not that it mattered much. Not like there's anything we can do. We'll wait for the others to be done, go in and take our share of the loot, and head back out to collect the cat reward. As always, the stoic silence of my partner gave me the gut feeling that he was judging me negatively for my actions. Would he rather I be out there slaving with the rest of them? The cacophony of yells and gunfire was loud enough to penetrate even these thick walls, but it was slowly dwindling to a distant sound after about half an hour. Stranger and I waited there for about an hour total before we figured it was best to get moving. We walked back down the corridor and past some of the others in the group. They were laughing and dragging 3 ponies between them, 2 stallions in security barding, and 1 mare whose flank was bloody around the thighs. She limped a little, sniffling with each step. I let them pass. I was getting sick of those judgmental eyes boring into the back of my skull. I grit my teeth and refused to look at Stranger as we moved down the corridor. We eventually found the stable door after 2 turns, finding the right direction by the slow procession of ponies and newly captured slaves filling out. The door to the stable was an unusual one. Usually, a stable door would lead into a basic area that connected to the rest of the interior, but this one led to a staircase that went down further. I stared down the stairs, and I was about to take a step down before I heard something on the very edge of my hearing. I turned away from the stable doorway and listened. The soft sloshing of water that trickled down the stairs and the constant trotting of hooves around us as ponies milled out of the stable dragging others that whined, whinnied, and cried out to be saved were the only sounds that met my ears. But I was sure that in that singular moment of silence, I'd heard the sound of some pony else crying, and it hadn't come from inside the stable. I turned away and headed down a different corridor, turning around a corner, and as quietly as I could, began moving down. Sadly, stealth wasn't a virtue I had in abundance. The soft clink of my prosthetic hoof accompanied my walk. A sharp breath stopped me outside a door that was opened just a hair. I opened it, finding an office similar to the previous one, but this one's filing cabinets looked to have been raided. Paper and trash floated about in the hoof-deep water that still rolled around on the floor. In the same corner as before sat a desk and a computer terminal, except this one was still sparking. Maybe some pony had made the same mistake I had and blew it up. Didn't seem that bad of a theory, after all. It had exploded on me, and I was supposed to be a smart pony. What made the scene interesting was that I wasn't the only one in the room. There, standing in front of the desk and staring at me with a jittery expression, was a stallion that was at least a decade my senior. He had amber eyes and a dirty lime green coat. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, and his disheveled long brown mane hung around his neck and shoulders in a mess that would have covered his eyes were it not for the hat holding it back. His hide was covered in leather barding, complete with a vest. He was also looking at me, warily. My first instinct was to hit him. "Lucky Horseshoe," I greeted softly, keeping my urges in check while glancing from him to the desk. "It's been a while." "Hey, Tail," he greeted stiffly, glancing around himself nervously. "Didn't think this kind of gig was up your street?" "Well, he began eyeing me. "Gotta survive somehow." "I thought you avoided groups as a rule because of your problem," I said while leering at him, wondering if I could buck him up the head before I could react. I probably couldn't. "As I said, need the caps." He glared at me, looking less nervous. "What's behind the desk, Lucky?" I challenged, taking a step closer, the soft clink of my hoof drawing his attention. "Your leg." He stared at the limb with wide eyes, the silence among those two words palpable between us. "Did you?" His voice trailed off as he asked with a slight note of concern. The concern made me want to hit him more. My eyes narrowed. "What's behind the desk?" I asked again as I approached. He stared at me before his eyes narrowed. "What are you gonna do, Tail?" We stared at each other challengingly for a bit before the sound of a gun cocking could be heard behind us. A slight smirk slipped over my features. Stranger had him dead to rights. Lucky Horseshoe glanced over my shoulder at what I could only guess was the sight of a large figure of Stranger holding his II-12 in his magical grip, aimed squarely at Lucky's head. I stepped around the stallion confidently and pushed the desk out of the way to reveal a curled-up unicorn filly, looking quite terrified of me. She had a sallow yellow coat, a dirt brown mane, and grey and yellow stable barding. Her cutie mark was a circular winding flower rooting out of a seed. Her brown eyes were dilated in fear. "Damn it, Lucky," I said under my breath. My attention went to the door as two ponies barged in. "What's going on in here? Every pony's out looking for you." The unicorn talking had a red coat, black mane, and bright yellow eyes. He wore metal barding and carried a shotgun at his side, coated in the soft glow of his magic. The other stallion had a yellow coat with an orange mane. He carried a revolver in his mouth. The moment they saw the filly, a bright grin stretched across the red stallion's mouth. From the doorway, another pony stepped in. His black mane with an orange streak and yellow coat were distinctive enough for me to recognize. Copper Twang.
"Oh, hey!"
he greeted the moment he saw me. There was a moment of silence and awkwardness. I didn't know how I was going to handle this situation. I might be able to talk our way out of this, but unfortunately, Lucky decided to do something very stupid. "You are not having her!" he yelled, standing between us and the filly. I face-hoofed. "What?" the red stallion asked, chuckling. "Residents get taken, that's the rules. Shove a collar on her and let's get going." "I won't let you enslave her!" This idiot was going to get us all killed. I heard the cock of a barrel and saw the red stallion readying his shotgun. "Wait, you really don't want to be doing that," I said, moving to stand between Lucky and the red stallion.
"What are you doing?"
Copper Twang approached, looking confused. "His name is Lucky Horseshoes, and he is not a pony you want to try shooting," I said firmly. I'd seen first hoof what happened to ponies that thought Lucky was easy pickings. "Get out of here, Tail. I don't need your help," Lucky grumbled.
"What's going on?"
"Get out of the way, or I'll shoot you too," the red stallion demanded. "Everyone, shut up!" I yelled, panting. All this noise in the area was giving me a headache. I coughed for a moment, feeling a writhing in my chest before I managed to make myself calm down. I wiped my mouth and looked around. A filly behind me, being protected by a pony I'd wished I'd never meet again. 2 idiots in front of me that were feeling trigger-happy. A young colt looking to prove himself a stallion, and stranger in the doorway. He was a good 10 paces away, but even in this dull light I could see that gaze of his, sapphire deep, and always judging, watching to see what I would do. It was like he was waiting for something, like he had always been, just waiting for me. Fuck. Bang! My gun was out and smoking before any pony could react. Bang! Stranger's gun went off, killing the other stallion, dropping the second one to the floor, blood pooling into the water at our hooves. 2 corpses. Copper Twang's eyes went wide. He pulled out the gun I'd given him, the 10mm, and he decided to aim it right at me. "Don't do it," I asked him softly. I could see him hesitating. He had it aimed at me, and his grip on it was shaking. I glanced at the stranger, but I saw he'd put his gun away. He wouldn't interfere. He was just watching. The bastard. Bang. I ducked low and forward. The bullet sliced into my shoulder, and the pain flashed and burned. I slipped my mouth down, grabbed the shiv in my collar with my mouth, and thrust. I felt wetness against my muzzle. I could feel the colt's body shaking as he leaned against me, the blade in his throat. "I'm sorry," I said softly. The boy fell into the water. I'd killed a child. I was silent for a bit, staring at the colt. He'd wanted to prove himself a stallion. I heard approaching hooves behind me. "Thank you," Lucky said, the gratitude lathered his voice. I decked him. I turned and hit him with as much force as I could. He was just lucky I didn't use my left hoof. It wasn't any stronger than my right, but metal hurt a lot more than hooves. He splashed to the ground unconscious. Damn it. Hitting him hadn't improved my mood. I stepped over Lucky's body, glancing down to make sure he at least wasn't going to drown in a few inches of water below us. When I was confident he wasn't, I turned to the filly. I stared down at her. She looked terrified. I glanced at my shoulder. The wound still itched and burned, but it wasn't too bad. The filly in front of me glanced at my wound and then to the now dead ponies on the floor. She swayed for a moment before her eyes rolled back and she collapsed. She'd fainted. "Stable ponies," I grumbled and turned away, heading for the door. Stranger made no move to let me past. He stood in the doorway, blocking me. I tried to move around him, but he moved to cut me off again. "What are you doing?" I asked carefully, looking up at him. He stared back at me, his only visible eye boring into me. "What?" I asked dangerously, my eyes narrowing. "What do you want from me?" I asked. I was sick of this. Sick of his judgmental stares, sick of his silent, stoic fucking manner, and sick of that single fucking eye. "What?" He didn't move, and he didn't speak. He just stared, waiting. I felt my stomach twist into knots, and I turned back to the filly, if only to look at something other than him. "You want me to save her, don't you?" I already knew the answer. He didn't need to give it, and he chose not to anyway. "She'd be better off if I didn't," I grumbled. "She's a stable pony." I turned to him, leering, wishing I could make him feel what I was feeling. "She won't survive outside. Stables are kind. Outside isn't kind. If she gets a good owner, she'll be fed, maybe homed. If she's unlucky, she'll be treated like shit and maybe even raped, but slaves are expensive, so at least most of them will try not to kill her at least," I argued. "It's a kinder life than what she'd have with me." He still refused to move. I wanted to rage against him, but he'd probably just stamp me out if I tried. I felt something slither and crawl in my throat again, and it drew another bout of painful coughing. I turned away from him when the coughing subsided. I wiped my mouth. "I fucking hate you." With a soft click, the mechanical collar latched in place around the unconscious filly's neck. I felt sick locking that thing on her. It was sleek, black, and might have been considered an okay accessory, were it not for the glowing red band along it and the fact that it couldn't be taken off by the wearer. I picked the filly up and slipped her onto my back before walking out of the room. This time, Stranger let me pass. I hesitated for a single moment before asking him to carry Lucky as well. I'd rather not leave the stallion behind to be killed. We didn't attract too much attention from the others as we moved through the corridors and out of the dam. One stallion did ask us about the shooting, but we explained it off as some of the ponies trying to ditch their jobs, so I had to put them down. Walking around with a collared filly on my back and the dead ponies was good enough evidence to halt their prying. Lucky was explained as having taken a hit to the head during the fight. That one was more or less true. The unconscious filly on my back made my insides feel heavy as I walked. I stole glances at Stranger, but he refused to meet my gaze. I was so tempted to hit him. We began heading back as a group. Some of us had died, and judging by the amount of ponies taken as slaves, many of them had died too. What I did notice was a distinct lack of large tech despite the orders. I'd seen a few saddlebags full, but other than that I'd expected some large machinery hauling. Even the black armoured ponies were carrying light. Maybe something had gone wrong, and my absence meant I'd missed something crucial. It was a mystery that I'd pondered for a bit, not out of any actual interest. Truth be told, I couldn't give a crap. But if I didn't make myself think of something, I was going to deck Stranger like I had Lucky. Truth be told, I was surprised I'd landed a hit on the old stallion. Lucky wasn't the easiest of ponies to face in a fight. Things don't go the way you want them to when fighting him. I had no idea what I was going to do. I couldn't leave the procession of ponies or I'd get shot. I couldn't steal the filly away, and I certainly couldn't leave Lucky to his own devices. He was a bit of a disaster, and that'd likely end up as a disaster for me. I looked up to the horizon ahead of me, pony hooves thundering in my ears, interrupted by the clink of my hoof as we walked. I scowled as a wrongness roiled through my insides. I had a bad feeling I was going to be stuck with a filly from a stable and an asshole from my past for longer than I'd like. And worse, I had another feeling I wasn't going to get paid. Footnote: level up. New perk: small surprises. Your use of impromptu weapons have made you a skilled surprise attacker, plus 10 damage on unsuspecting ponies when using your shiv.